Alright, hello. So, finally today I'm gonna walk you through the process of one of my paintings. I will do my best to give you some insights along the way and tell you a bit more about the way I approach my paintings. This painting here starts out with a charcoal transfer, and the reason for that is very simple. I want to make things easier for myself here. I don't want to be concerned with proportions later in the painting process, and to be honest, it's always better to leave your ego at home when you go to the studio. There are many ways you can start a painting, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter how you do it. You just have to get the job done and do what's best for the painting. What does matter though is the painting surface you choose. Depending on what you choose, the final look of your painting will be very different. And in this case here, I'm using something that most of you might not be familiar with, and it's a product called Yupo paper. There's also a company called Lana. They have a similar product. It's called Vanguard, and both of these are very similar. They are so-called synthetic papers and are probably more on the unusual side. But synthetic paper is just a fancy way of saying plastic, so I guess I'm painting on plastic here. It has very similar properties to a nicely finished wood panel, so we are making things easier for us here. Instead of going through the tedious and absolutely annoying process of endlessly priming and sanding down a wood panel, I'm just using plastic here, and as you will see, the end result is pretty much the same. I'm also using a very limited palette and limited materials in general for this painting. I'll be using a few brushes, a paint roller, nothing fancy or special in any way, maybe except for the new Trekell brushes that I got recently, and I'll be using safflower oil as a painting medium. And that's about it. The sheet of plastic that I'm using here is very thin, so it has to be mounted to a wood panel, so that we have a nice and sturdy surface we can paint against. I'm starting the painting with the darkest areas, and the lightest areas will be the white of the plastic sheet. This way I'm setting the range of values for the whole painting, meaning that everything that I'm going to paint will lie somewhere between those two extremes. In case you were wondering what I'm painting here, it is my own eye. And you also might be wondering why I'm painting it in a different color, and that is for two reasons. On the one hand, I am doing this to show you that realism in painting, contrary to popular belief, does not depend on how realistic the colors are. There are many things that will determine how realistic your painting is, but color is not one of them. On the other hand, I'm also trying to paint an aesthetically pleasing painting here. One that is more than just the exact rendition of something that exists in the real world. After laying in the darkest parts, I'm quickly moving to the midtones. And I'm working on the area of the iris, and I'm filling out the white of the eyeball. Since the eye will be the main focus of the painting, I'm also focusing on that area in the first stage of the painting. Pretty early in the process you'll notice that with just a few brush strokes you'll already see quite a convincing level of realism. A little later you might be wondering, why does it look so real? Well, you see, painting realistically is all about understanding what makes something look tangible in the first place. This is actually one of my pet peeves. People's common understanding of what makes a painting look real. People are obsessed with detail and also with photorealism, and they think the more detail they add and the more photorealistic it looks, the more real it will become. But I can tell you that that's actually not true. There are very different degrees of realism, and there are also very different ways for something to look real. I mean, what does it even mean for a two-dimensional surface to look real? Photorealism is just one kind of realism. It means that the final result of your painting will in every way look like a real photograph. And a photograph is a two-dimensional surface, so basically, in the best case, your painting will look like the illusion of a two-dimensional surface. And quite frankly, I think it's unfortunate, to say the least, that what most people will equate to the highest form of realism is just that, the illusion of a two-dimensional surface. Photorealism is just one kind of realism. There are many different ways you can paint something realistically, and photorealism is just one of them. It's also probably the easiest one. You can also make your paintings look realistic in a different way. You can make them look like real tangible objects. As you will see, the eye that I'm painting here will look almost like a real eye. And that without losing myself in outrageous amounts of detail. I'll just paint what's necessary to create the illusion, and as you can see, it doesn't take that much. So one of the reasons why I'm able to do this is because earlier in my career I spent years and years studying trompe-l'œil paintings. If you don't know what trompe-l'œil means, it means deceive the eye. And it's the art of creating illusions that depict objects on a two-dimensional surface as if there were real objects in three-dimensional space. And over the years I've noticed that the principles of trompe-l'œil painting can be applied to whatever it is you're painting. Luckily, to achieve the effect that I'm talking about, you don't have to spend hours and hours on your painting, painstakingly painting every tiny detail. You just have to understand what gives objects form in real life, and even more than that, how human perception works, and how to manipulate it. But I digress. Let me know if you want to hear more on this topic in the comment section, and I will try to elaborate on this in a future video. So focusing on the main subject here, after painting the darkest parts of the eye, finishing the pupil, the iris and the eyeball, I'm finally able to fill in the rest of the painting. What I'm doing here is juxtaposing realism and abstraction. And not only because I personally find this contrast intriguing, but also because it works in our favor here. We are putting something that's already looking quite real next to something that is looking very abstract, and by that we are enhancing the desired effects. It's actually not unlike putting a pinch of salt in your cookie dough. It contrasts the sweetness and makes everything even better. After that I go back to where I started. I rework all the areas and make sure that the shapes are correct and also that my values are correct. And as I go along, I try to push the realism even a bit further. So since we are concerned with creating the illusion of depth here, I try to use a lot of transparent colors in the dark areas. I'm also making sure to use paint that is more opaque when I'm painting the highlights. This again is the idea of contrasting. In this case, the surface qualities of the paint, all to get us one step closer to the final illusion. This is basically just a matter of diligence. There are no surprises here, no shortcuts, you just have to do the work. I could keep on painting this eye until you can't recognize that it's a painting anymore. But you have to keep in mind that it won't change how the painting is perceived from a certain distance. You see, paintings are things that we put on our walls, and usually these things are viewed from a certain distance. I think about where it might hang and from which distance it might be looked at, because all those things have to inform the way we paint a piece of art. Painting and art in general, to a large degree, is conceptual. It's more than just the technique and the degree of realism we are able to achieve. Again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but all this just goes to show you how important the conceptual process of my paintings is and how much it'll affect the final result. In the case of this eye painting, I know it'll usually be viewed from a few feet away, and then it might draw the viewer in to inspect it more closely. Now imagine this. You see a painting hanging on a wall, this painting. You look at it and you're intrigued. You look at it and you think to yourself, oh wow, that looks super real. You go a bit closer, still looks like a real eye. You go a bit closer still and think to yourself, I don't know, that can't be painted. It's probably a photo. Now, where's the punchline? You see, I want the viewer to have an aha effect. To see what they initially thought to be a real eye turn into a collection of brush strokes that when viewed in their entirety look convincingly real. I want them to go back and forth and see the illusion fall apart again and again. The act of viewing a painting is not unlike a good story in that regard. It has a beginning, a middle and an end. But with that being said guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end here. Thanks for watching, please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and yeah. Have a good one.